I'm Jordan.
And I'm Rosanna.
And on this podcast, we explore how to take life off autopilot
and relentlessly pursue a life worth living together. Hello, and welcome to Season 3, Episode 8 of the Relentless Pursuit podcast. The kids are all right. So earlier this week, I was on social media, and a friend of mine from elementary school had posted something, and it was a note from one of her son's teachers kind of praising his artistic ability. And I commented on it, and I said, "Oh, I'm not at all surprised the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. I remember when we were kids that I was always so jealous of your artistic abilities." And so we were going back and forth and just kind of like fondly remembering elementary school and childhood. And I was sharing, I said, there's just this special place in my heart for like all of the friends that we all grew up together. And I said, we all still kind of keep in touch even though we aren't close. And it's just, something I hold, near to my heart. And so all week I've really been just like reminiscing about being a kid and growing up and what that looked like. Just playing hide and seek and playing tag on the playground with all of my friends and, hoping that the boy you liked was going to tag you during recess. I remember playing house and with my kitchen center with like my girlfriends and Barbies and all of that. And then as we got older, we even had cousins who lived a few blocks away and just like walking over with my brothers on a summer afternoon and, playing Ghost in the Graveyard in the middle of the day. And, it's just... It seemed so easy back then to be a kid, that you can just kind of live life, kind of carefree and just play. But all of the play of our generation seemed like it was like this kid organized play. Mm-hmm. And then when I was thinking about like our kids and how they play and what they're doing, I thought like, what does their time look like? Are they playing the way that they used to, like we used to play? But I feel like I'm always facilitating their play and what they're doing and what their wants.
So the nostalgia of your childhood is now you're kind of comparing that to the experience our kids are having.
Yeah, and it kind of like led me to this question. Is it harder to be a child now to grow up than it was when we were?
Well, define harder, And I also wonder too about like that nostalgia. Like it's a little bit easier to look back and say and remember the good times and say like things were simpler, things were good. I don't know if you would describe it as a child that same way too.
Yeah, I don't know, but yeah, it just seemed like life was very carefree. Mm-hmm. And all we did was play. Like it didn't seem like that there were like problems or thing, I wonder what my parents' perspective would be on all of that. That they would just say like, "Oh yeah, you could just walk down the street to your friend's house and just go and be gone." And It's a little different now.
Yeah. So there's no doubt that parenting is different now. And so this is what we'll get into is really like compare some stats and facts just that we've researched about parenting and about kids these days. And your little whippersnappers. Or how many times do we start conversations with the kids like, when I was your age? Now we're starting to sound
Now we sound
old.
Like our parents who used to say the same thing to us when we rolled our eyes at them.
It's a rite of passage for, each generation. But I think so here's one of the things that strikes me though is that there's a few things that you do in life that are as important as parenting. But just kind of going with the theme of our podcast, like sometimes you can kind of go on autopilot with that, right? Whether it's just like these day-to-day kind of random decisions or like we think we're doing the right things. And we're all certainly trying our best, but it's pretty rare that I feel like I've actually like looked into it. Like think about how many things we've studied or what we have degrees and certifications in. And as far as parenting goes, it's like, well, we're kind of winging it. So that's why I'm looking forward to this conversation because it is one of many conversations that we'll have about parenting, about this role and just like hitting the pause button and examining, are we doing it right? Are the kids all right?
I think the easiest way to answer it is I think the kids will be all right because as parents, I think we worry about, are we doing it right? Are we doing it enough? Are we giving our kids the best things? And I think those are all really big questions with really big expectations. Like we aren't going to solve all the world's problems. We're not going to be able to protect our kids from everything. We're going to miss some things. We're going to misstep. We're going to make mistakes. And I think we all need to know that that's okay. Mm-hmm. But it's learning along the way of how can I do this better and not better based on what somebody else is doing for or with or to their kids, because we have to do what's best for our own kids.
Yeah.
And so sometimes it's, getting advice from someone that or, someone who is, certified as a professional in this area.
Mm-hmm.
But how many times have we tried different things until you find what works for you?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think part of the tongue-in-cheek goal a lot of parents say is like, well, I hope I don't mess my kids up too much. And of course we don't want that. But think about like the opposite end of the spectrum. Like, is there such a thing as giving them the best childhood possible? Like, what does that look like? What's the outcome of that? So we almost need to like think about what outcome do we want for our kids. We want them to be happy. We want them to have certain character qualities that no matter what comes their way, they're able to, be
Cope and deal with
yeah,
setbacks and failures and frustrations.
yeah, and be able to like thrive, emotionally and financially, and there's a lot of angles to that. So actually, that's getting into some of my questions that I have for you in a little bit. But first, let me tantalize you with a few things. You've probably heard some of these before. So I looked at parenting, you looked at kids, and we'll kind of compare some of our facts just to get our research going. So I looked at a number of resources here. One particular resource that kind of tied a bunch of these things together was a 2018 article in the New York Times. It's called The Relentlessness of Modern Parenting. And as you look at a lot of the research, a lot of the articles, and just reflections on modern parenting, one of the continued strains is that parenting is time consuming and it is stressful these days. And I don't know, actually, according to the research, like parents of previous generations would not have described it in that same way. But would you agree that those are at least two words that describe it?
I would think so. It can be.
Okay. So there's a lot more that goes into it. So let me just share with you a little bit that I have here. So for like going with that, so parents are spending more time with their kids. Fathers are spending more time than they really like historically ever have. And moms are too, except moms, there's more working moms in this era as well. But they're still spending as much time with their kids than the non-working mom of previous generations.
Which to me is mind-boggling.
Right.
Right? Because like moms of previous generations, I mean, it's you kind of like when you watch like those old like 50s and 60s sitcoms, like the mom is at home and she has all of this time to like be in full hair and makeup and a dress most of the day because the kids are they eat breakfast, they're out of the house, they're at school, they go play, they come home, they eat dinner. Like the mom isn't like, doing all this child rearing. The kids are just out playing and the mom is kind of dolled up and cooking dinner.
Yeah. God bless. So, so in a way that, I mean, we look at that and that's a positive, as fathers are spending more time with their children. You think about, and maybe this is more of a trope than a reality, but you have the, like, kind of like that detached father who like works, comes home, just sits in his lazy boy and drinks beer and doesn't have a lot of interactions. That's the way my dad described his grandfather. I mean, so we're going way back now, but, so a lot of this, though, is tied to economics because if you look at the scope of how the financial world has changed for families, there's a few dynamics that are really important. First, like there's more working moms. Well, why are there more working moms? For a couple of reasons, and no single reason is good or bad, but for one is that, there's kind of been a feminist movement to have more women involved in society, which I think is fantastic. But the other thing that kind of goes along with that is that in a lot of cases, to maintain a standard of living, like a middle class living, you want two working parents. Or there's also an uptick in single parent households, which is statistically more like single mother households. And so there's a lot more time spent working as well. Just
Did you find anything with like a shift in like entrepreneurs too, where like dads do something that maybe they start their own business, and so like in order to like be able to afford insurance, a mother will work out of the house to provide insurance for her family to no. I was just wondering.
No, I didn't.
Okay.
But going along with that, so there's a lot more like you have both parents working, and another element of this too is that you to really get like a middle class wage, you need to attend college now. It's kind of expected. And college admissions are becoming increasingly competitive. So now that's kind of, as parents, that's what we're recognizing. And there is this a little bit of anxiety, even if we can't name it or attach it to those things. There's anxiety that if we don't put the requisite time and energy and money investing in our kids, then, and this is statistically true as well, they are much less likely to achieve the same or better economic circumstances when they're adults than what they enjoy as a child. Did I explain that?
Yeah.
Did that make
it
sense?
Totally made sense.
So now, like a lot of this is kind of this anxiety of like, man, I really need to like put the time, I need to sign them up for these activities. I need to get them, think about, and we kind of laughed at this, but when like a 2-year-old gets dropped off at daycare, sometimes it's not daycare. It's like school. It's like 2-year-old school. And it's like this fretting over, are they involved in enough enrichment activities, whether it's school at the age of 2, or if it's tutoring or music lessons or travel, baseball or soccer or whatever, so that by the time they get to college, they'll be competitive and get into a good school and then be able to earn the kind of future that we hope that they have.
Yeah, that's.
And if they don't, then this is culturally what parents are doing. And they're going to be kind of competing in a sense against kids internationally who do have that parenting. Although I say internationally, but a lot of this is more of an American phenomenon. Now, the other statistic I'll throw in here too is that it's not just time, and we'll reflect on some of the activities we do with our kids, like time ways, but it's not just time, but it's also money as well. So if you already have money and you have the flexibility to do these things, then you are more able to pass that advantage on to your children as well.
Well, and I wonder too if there's a correlation between, parenting and the time and the like financial obligation we feel that needs to be met with enrolling them in all of these enrichment activities and what that costs and how many kids people are having, right? Like, because long term you're thinking, right, I can't afford to keep that up with 3 kids, 4 kids.
All Americans are having fewer children this generation as well. Others, not
not us apparently. Yeah.
Yeah, but that is realistic too. It's like if I have fewer children, then I'll have more time and money that I can invest in each child.
Right. So from their schooling to their athletics to like any kind of inclination that they have, because 2 is way less than 4.
Yeah. And so you hear me gripe about that because we have our kids involved in piano. And so just for listeners, like I grew up playing the piano, loved it, trying to pass that experience on to my kids. And from the age of 5, we pay $20 a week for each kid. And now we have 3 kids who are doing that every, so you can do the math. And that on top of the different, they're all involved in like a competitive or athletic activity. So it adds up even at this young age. And actually another statistic that I found was that the amount of money parents spend on their children used to spike when their children are in high school. But now that's actually shifted. And I want to look into this a little bit more because it sounded so like a little too strange to be true. But it spikes now before the age of 6 and after the age of 18.
Well, and I can see that because, and I was talking about this with someone earlier this week, that we want our kids to be the best athlete. And so the earlier we sign them up, right, the more we can figure out or train them to be the best of the best, so that, or in hopes of them being able to do it like through college and earn a scholarship.
And you get the scholarship.
And then people laugh because they're like, well, by the time you've put them in these elite training programs from the time that they're 4 until the time that they're 18, you probably could have paid college tuition. So really it's just kind of, when are you paying?
Yeah.
At the beginning or at the end.
Yeah. So one last thing I want to add to this too, because I think this will tie into some of the things you'll share about kids, is that like I said, parents are spending more time with children, but you've heard the term helicopter parenting, where they're in closer proximity to their children. They're playing with their children and supervising their children a great deal more than in previous generations too. So the idea of like just having them out of your sight is uncommon. And it's actually frowned upon because states have passed laws, like basically saying, I think it was called the free range parenting law, like basically saying like you're not at fault as a parent, or you won't be charged with neglect if your child is out of your sight. Like if your kid is like walking the dog alone around the block and they're not, directly under your arm.
Well, and we've talked about this and we've laughed about it because there are certain things like I wouldn't do or let the kids do that you're like, oh, that's fine. I go, well, right, but you might think it's fine. But then you have the kind of judgment of other people surrounding you who are looking at you thinking your kid is too far away from you. You're not supervising.
Well, I'll tell this story too. So this was last fall, and we had our 2-year-old. So we were at a soccer game for our oldest. The 2-year-old was with me, and he ended up, and I could see him very clearly because it was this wide open field, but he ended up running away from me to go play on some empty bleachers, to go climb on those. I did not follow him. So I would say I was probably 50 to 75 yards away from him. And I was going to walk over there. Actually, I had the dog with me, so I was doing something with her leash. And the coach who was like running the game literally stopped the game when she noticed that he was over on those bleachers by himself, like looking for the parent. And I even raised my hand. I'm like, I can see him. I'm the dad. And she didn't start the game until I started walking in that direction to be closer to him. And it was like this awkward moment where I'm like, look, I'm very comfortable with what's taking place at this moment. The kid is safe. He's still being supervised, and I'm heading in that direction. But it seemed like there was, I wouldn't say judgment, but like I would say like anxiety. Like an adult
She was uncomfortable with
this
the
child.
amount of space between you and your child at a young age. So that's why it's, I think that's
so you listeners, you can judge me.
But that's the part of parenting that's hard is, everybody has kind of a different style or a different approach to parenting. Some parents have a very short leash on their kids. Even sometimes when we do things with the kids, the amount of space we will put between us and our kids is uncomfortable to my parents, where my parents are more concerned about like their safety because they're, anything could happen. Someone
they
could
run
grab
into
them.
the streets.
Correct.
And
As parents, we kind of know that our kids know that their boundaries or their limits or what they're allowed to do. And so that's the hard part about parenting is even if you feel like you have it figured out or you feel like what works for you, there's pressure from the outside to do things a certain way. And so
to think about things a certain way.
You're kind of juggling that, like what I think is best, what is actually best, and what people are saying about what we're doing. So, it can be hard.
Actually, can I tell one other short story too?
Sure.
You might remember this as well. We were at the zoo. This might have been, I don't know if it was Brookfield, maybe it was in St. Louis.
No, we were in St. Louis. I remember this completely.
And our daughter was 2 years old, and she, I think she insisted on, I don't know.
She was throwing a tantrum.
She
didn't want to move forward. We were all moving forward.
Yeah, we were just walking. She didn't want to get in the stroller. She didn't want to be carried, and she didn't want to walk. So at some point as a parent, we're just like, fine, suit yourself. And then you're like, I'm going to walk away. And again, we probably got I would say maybe 10 yards away from her. And
well, I said, there's a lot of people here. You're going to make a lot of people uncomfortable if you walk away from her right now.
Oh, and she was,
and you insisted. You're like, nope, this is what we're gonna do.
You just and then they get worried and then they follow you and comply. Come on, don't leave me hanging here, parents.
Nothing like the act of
this
coercion
has happened to
with
more
your
than
2-year-old.
right.
Yeah.
So you get into that battle, but then I would say 3 or 4 women just see her in what she looks alone, even though
she's crying.
Yeah, they're like, "Are you by yourself? Are you okay?" And then I really walk back at that point. I'm like, I'm her dad, and they just the looks that I got from them. In my mind, I'm like, yeah, sure, take her side. But
and I got my "told you so" right in there.
Exactly. So anyway, that was just another kind of comical moment too. And again, they're in those circumstances, they're very little, and they're still being supervised. There's a little bit more context to those circumstances too, but it's just kind of those moments of really trying to figure it out as a parent, and you have these questions and sometimes these battles, and you're just trying to do the best that you can.
I agree. I mean, what is the answer? But that mom culture was telling me you cannot leave her, crying there. I can see all these moms. I'm like, they're gonna swarm, they're gonna hover, they're gonna think she's alone. You're like, it's fine. Yeah. So lesson learned on your part.
Yeah. All right. So there, from my end, like just a little bit of fodder for our conversation, just about parents and parenting culture. I'm glad you mentioned mom culture too. You'll have to teach me a little bit more about it, but I'm glad I'm not a part of mom culture sometimes.
It's a little different.
Yeah.
It's a little different. So what do you want to do? Do you want to go into questions about parenting, or you want to talk about kids a little bit first? And
Well, I want to hear what you found about kids.
okay, so I was just looking at kids in general. So we know that it's hard to be a parent, and we're parenting kids differently than our parents did. And so I was kind of thinking about like what's missing with our kids, because we're putting them in tutoring. I remember going into my son's kindergarten classroom and doing reading with the kids back and forth. And there was a girl already reading at a second grade level. In kindergarten. So they're just learning to read, which we never learned to read in kindergarten. So to me, these kids are like already ahead that they're learning to read.
I learned to read in kindergarten.
Okay.
But it's really first grade, I think, when we were younger,
right,
where that really got traction.
Anyway, thank you for
the
telling
kids.
us that you learned to read early. And this girl sat down with a book that was like, there's like the pre-reader, the level 1. She was like already on like level 4.
She's on like chapter books.
Yeah, and I was like just staring at her. I'm like, wow. Did your parents teach you how to read? And she goes, no, I go to Kumon. I'm like, what's that? She's like, oh, like tutoring? I go, oh, how long have you been going to tutoring? Oh, 2 years. It's a 5-year-old. She's been, well, sure, she can read at like a 4th grade reading level. She's been reading since she was 2. And like, to me, that never dawned on me that like, we should be signing our kids up to do that. Cause I was like, oh, they're just kids. And then I came home and told you, and I was like, oh my gosh, our kids are behind. They should have been tutoring, like learning to read. And the one thing that you said to me is like, they're just kids. Like everybody's going to learn to read. So sure, she learns to read early. But then, like as a parent, you want what's best for them. You want them to be successful. But am I setting my kids up at a disadvantage if I'm not doing what everybody else is doing?
Yeah. I don't know if I said this at the time, but right now I'm thinking like our kids are at no shortage of reading. Like you listeners need to know, like the bedtime routine for all of our kids is reading intensive. And we could get to more detail about that too and maybe reevaluate it. But like we're spending a lot of time reading to our kids.
So
too much, I would say.
So just kind of based on all of that, I was like, so what is missing in our kids' lives that may be different from when we were kids? And like, why are we, so gung-ho about making sure that they have the best of everything and every opportunity? And, is that to their advantage? And in some ways, yeah, it is. And in other ways, maybe it's not. So I was looking at the influence of play. So one of the articles I looked at was from The Atlantic, and it was in their health section, and it was called All Work and No Play: Why Your Kids Are More Anxious and Depressed. And basically they said lack of play affects emotional development, which can increase anxiety, depression, and problems of attention and self-control. So then the article outlines kind of like these 5 things that play does for our kids. And play, we're talking about like just creative, active play, like running around, being outside. And it says that play allows kids to develop a connection to their own self-identity and interests. Because when you play, like you start to play the things that you're interested in, right? Our 6-year-old right now is very into horses. And so when she plays, everything is a horse. She's running around neighing, like she's like...
She jumps in my back and says, hee-ha!
Yeah, I mean, all kinds of things about like these little horse girls from Spirit. And so they start to realize what they like when they're given the freedom to kind of like come up with and express, their own identity. It says it allows them to make decisions, solve problems, exert self-control, and follow rules. And so if you think about that with games, right? Like you have to make decisions, you have to like learn how to like keep yourself in check, follow rules. Because when you don't, especially when you're playing with other people, then they don't want to play with you anymore. So you kind of have to learn those like boundaries and parameters of playing. It helps to handle emotions, including anger and fear. When I go back to like that tag and Ghost in the Graveyard, like I think I was already maybe in like 5th or 6th grade, and then we had cousins that were older, but I remember like walking with my brother to their house, and it was maybe like 6 blocks away, and then like running between yards, and that fear of like, is the neighbor going to come out and yell at me? It's like you're really learning about your environment and what you should be doing and not be doing. You're kind of like weighing those things.
Okay, so you were trespassing. All right.
Yes, trespassing. Helps you make friends and get along with others. And then the last one, it gives kids a creative source, often resulting in happiness. And so we kind of talked about that with hobbies and passions, where it's like this ability to have a creative space often brings fulfillment and happiness. And so if kids don't have play, or enough, free play or active play, those are some of the things that they're missing because they're, being drilled with this, that, and the other thing. Or, right, they're on the screen somewhere. So we can obviously talk about that. So I got these statistics from healthline.com, and it said 65% of kids age 1 through 4 are not playing enough, meaning they're usually on a screen, but are not just allowed to play and kind of use their imagination and be creative.
So, and by play, you obviously don't mean like screens or video games then. There's
Correct.
something, okay.
Like this free play with, something other than a device. 75% of kids under 12 are not getting enough active free play, running, riding bikes, being independent. And then it said more than 91% of American kids play video games, and 90% of those video games are violent. So even just looking at when they are given a screen, what are they doing on those screens, and like what influence does like violence have on the way that they act and interact with others?
Yeah.
I mean, so there's a lot there. So, one of my biggest questions is like, do our kids know how to play?
Well, yeah. But I mean, here's what I noticed. I noticed a couple of things that influence that. For one, there's obviously like this past year, like the pandemic had like changed the scope of play. They weren't going to school. They didn't have recess. Couldn't go to the pool. So a lot of usual sources of play were limited to some extent. And then winter around here is limiting as well. Like, and that's one of the things. Like, you can't just go to the park, or we can't like go for a bike ride, or just walk over to someone's house. And so you do feel a little bit more confined in those circumstances. So I think those are just factors to consider too. But that, like, I would say, like, yes, our kids definitely know how to play. I think the scope of that has changed a little bit. And this maybe varies by household too. But, like, I notice our kids really like playing with us, like, particularly with me. Like, wherever I am in that, they'll seek me out. Where's Dad? Do you want to play? And I realize I've, in some ways, become a source of their entertainment, or become like a playmate. So, and I think that's a good thing to some extent, and I love being able to be like, yeah, let's get included in your fun. And I still they'll ask 50 times a day. I'll tell them no, like 49 of those times. But they keep asking, and eventually there's kind of this opportunity that we can do something that's fun together. I also noticed that I was reading about this too, how toys that are made are not, they don't allow the same kind of imaginative free play that items did in previous generations. Toys are made like with very specific functions and features, and it can often inhibit imagination. So, I mean, you go way back, and a lot of kids would just like find stuff in the yard. And actually, I really like this. I don't know what your feelings are about it, but when they're just like digging in dirt and playing with sticks that they find, like a stick becomes a gun, or it's a staff, or it's a bow, for
a wand.
Yeah, right. And so that I mean, that's genuine imagination instead of having like the actual item itself. So, and I still think having toys is good as well, but you almost want like playing kind of like dynamic toys that become tools for the imagination. So that's why like a lot of toys we get, I'm like, let's not open this, or if it's a gift that they get, like let's not open this, because it comes with like all these specific functions and features, and it can like how do you even use it, because it plays for you in a sense. Now the other thing too is that the number of toys I found becomes inhibitive as well. So we've talked about, actually, I don't know if we've talked about the paradox of choice on this podcast before, but it's a book that I'll include in the show notes too, but it is kind of this idea that the more options you have, then the more dissatisfying making any choice becomes. So just think about when you go to a restaurant and you have like this huge menu and everything on it looks good. Well, making a choice becomes stressful because you're not thinking about what you're going to enjoy from the menu. You're thinking about all the things you're going to miss out. And the same thing is true in a slightly different dynamic with your toys, where you begin to have so many that they lose meaning and they lose value. And now we have, I mean, our kid yesterday tried to pull something off the shelf, and like this box with some pieces in it like fell down, just because our kids' closets are overflowing with toys, most of which are unused.
It's so funny what you think overflowing is, because and like, okay, this is, the comparison game. Compared to a lot of people I know, our kids have probably 1/16 of what they have. And so it's a lot for us, but what's a lot for us isn't a lot for somebody else. And so that's why moms do that thing where they like have a bunch of toys out and then they like pack those away and then they bring out some new toys, where it's like you're trying to limit those options. You're trying to like, so that there's not so much to choose from, but it's, easier to like find something or to be drawn to something because there are not too many choices.
Yeah, but I mean, you go back several generations, and it used to really only be like the richest kids who had just piles of unused toys. Now, I feel like that's a little bit more common, and I don't want to speak for every household, but it's certainly true in ours, where our kids, how often do they say, like, I'm bored? And we start listing, well, you could do this, or you could do this, or you could do this, and we name every toy they have, and, there's just in that listing, I feel like, ugh, like, why do you have so much and are still dissatisfied? I don't think it's the kid's fault.
Yeah, I mean, that's one way to look at it. So the kids do know how to play, but maybe the question is, as parents, like, are we encouraging them to play in a creative way that isn't reliant on screens and isn't reliant on toys, right? Like, maybe our generation as parents' problem is that we're trying to make them happy all the time. And so we give them so many choices, thinking that more choices is going to make them happy, that more choices is going to make them more engaged. And then, sometimes we find that, like, oftentimes they're not playing with those things, but our four are in the basement playing with cardboard boxes, making up some kind of crazy game.
That's what I've been saying.
Stacking,
like, for next
stacking
Christmas,
pillows.
only get cardboard boxes. That's
but,
what they want.
It forces them to be creative and like come up with some game where it's like they have a Pop-A-Shot down there and a gymnastics bar and a Ninja Warrior course. And although they'll play with those things or their hoverboard, right, like when they're most engaged and when we hear like the most like laughs and yelling because they're like cooperating and play fighting and all of that, it's drawn around very simple things.
Yeah. And that's why, and I was reading about this, like part of child play is kind of reinventing something. So like think about all the mats that we have so they don't break their necks if they fall off that course that we have downstairs. But that, like, they hardly use it for that purpose. In fact, half the time they're on the course, they've moved the mat somewhere else. But they set it up to make like a bowling alley and they take our weights and they rearrange those into some kind of lane, and they come up with races, or then they're kind of inventing their own games and activities. And that's where the cardboard box comes in, is it can like really kind of become anything. You can crawl in it, you can open it up, you can lay it flat, you can draw on it, you can cut holes in it. And they've done all those things, and that's where I've found like they tend to be the most engaged when they can invent and imagine along with their play.
Well, and I think, you kind of brought up this idea of boredom. And so like my question is, it's kind of like WDBD. What does boredom do?
You need an acronym for that?
I just thought it was kind of funny.
Okay.
Like, are we afraid to let our kids be bored, right? Some kids go from golf lessons to basketball to their reading tutor to a play date to something else, where as parents, we're facilitating so much for them. They never have a moment to be bored. Mm-hmm. And when you don't have a moment to be bored, you don't have to come up with something to do. And so now we've had just atrocious weather across the entire country the last couple weeks. It's like sub-zero. There's got to be like 38 inches of snow in our front yard, which is great, but it's too cold to be in. And, the kids are like, what should I do? And, we
Dad,
list...
can you play with me?
We list all the things that they can do.
Can I go on video, guys?
Yes, this is a time... Right. So you're trying to keep them off screens. And, as a parent, it's easy to put them on a screen, right? Like right now... We're recording.
Yes, this podcast has been brought to you by
multiple screens for every child.
Children, so they stay quiet.
So, they serve a purpose, but when we let, as parents, like our default become put them on a screen or let them be on a screen because they're not complaining, they're not whining, they're not bored, but is that what's best for them? And so as parents, it's like this, we don't want to be bothered because our lives are so important and our children are so important to us, yet we let...
And parents are very busy as well. So I want to talk about screens, but I want to put boredom in a little bit more context too, because I was reading about this as well. And it kind of goes along with other kinds of emotions or experiences that children can have. So I'll lump anxiety in there with it too. There is kind of an arc to these experiences. So just take boredom, for example. There's, you start off fine and then you get really bored. So, here's my bell-shaped curve. You get really bored. And then that boredom declines when you kind of figure out your own circumstance. And we've seen that with our kids. I'm bored. Why don't you go to your room, go find something to do? And then there's a lot of like discomfort and anger.
Angst, yeah.
And then 5 minutes later, they've found something to do and they're actually entertaining themselves. This happens with anxiety as well, where if you're like feeling nervous or uncomfortable about something, again, like those thoughts and feelings increase. But and I'm just talking about like a typical like childhood experience, you're able to kind of sort through that and bring yourself back down. Well, at the height of those curves, when children are experiencing either the most boredom or the most anxiety or just fill in the blank, that's when parents intervene. And so that denouement of that bell-shaped curve becomes interrupted, and kids lose the ability to kind of resolve their own emotions.
Now, do you think that is like, I don't want to say a parenting problem, but a problem that we have as parents because we think we are supposed to help them solve all their problems, not allow them to have discomfort or feel discomfort. We feel like we're doing them a favor by solving that problem for them.
Yeah.
That they never get.
And of course, like we love our kids, like we want them to be happy, and if I can give you a shortcut to that, then sure.
So, I mean, so then really what we have to look at is like, are we trying to solve all of our kids' problems for them? And when we do that, what disservice are we doing to them when they don't have to figure it out themselves? Mm-hmm. And what you were talking about kind of like with that little bit of anxiety, discomfort, and then like figuring it out reminds me of, the conversations earlier this season that we've had about self-care, where it's like kind of like the same thing where sometimes we need time to kind of like step back and like listen to our own like internal monologue and like, okay, what's right for me? What do I need at this moment? And kind of like, it's the same thing, solve that problem for ourselves. But also kind of like I had said with, kids in play, it allows them to like develop a connection to their self-identity and their own interests. Like that they have to be the facilitator of that we can't always do that for them.
Right. Yeah. So it's almost like, trying to take a shortcut that ends up, cutting out what you're really trying to accomplish. And so, there's a lot of things we have to learn even as adults, like just how to cope with certain things. And then this is getting back to screens, but I would say all other kinds of like digital entertainment in a sense. Like it's a very noisy world as well, right? Because we have our screens, we have video games, we have things we can watch, we have things we can listen to, and it's portable, it's customizable. But what a lot of those things do is it's giving us, even as adults, like an excuse to tune our own thoughts out. And I think that becomes detrimental when we kind of forget the sound of our own voice, of our own inner monologue. And so, especially for children who first need to develop that, I'm concerned about our kids and to what extent they are developing that, to what extent we're helicoptering in ways that are kind of productive.
Well, I just finished the book Untamed by Glennon Doyle, and she was talking about her high school age son who she said, seemed to be living on his phone. And she kind of coined it as this term. She said, our kids are living among us. Where they're kind
of like that popular game.
Like that popular game.
You guys haven't played Among Us. You should check it out. But it's all the rage.
That they are on their screens, they are finding it an easier place to exist on their screens, a place easier than their own minds and in their own bodies. Because when they're on their screens, right, they're just kind of mindlessly scrolling. They're kind of even numb to what's going on around them in their own home. Mm-hmm. They're just not present. Mm-hmm. They're there in body, but like their mind is in this other world. They exist somewhere else, but they're not existing like in the here and in the now.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you and I have said the same thing too. Like we want to be distanced from our phones so we can be here and now.
Right.
So it's a portal to being somewhere and even someone else. And again, I was reading. We did a lot of reading for this. I was reading about like teenagers more so. Fewer of them are dating. Fewer of them are getting together like socially. Fewer of them are even driving before the age of. Or it used to be a rite of passage, like your 16th birthday, like you go and get your driver's license or somewhere around there. A few of them are learning to drive by that age as well. So there's like certain things that used to be like these norms that have been replaced, and allegedly because of the emergence of digital prominence.
And I've never made that connection, but like I've heard that more and more. It's like, oh yeah, and I know that there's more stipulations with driving now and how many hours and who can be in the car. But I remember like at 16, everyone around here, you got your license, you were out, like you were with people, and now because you can be with people without being with them, kids are withdrawn, a little more withdrawn, that they don't have to be with others.
Yeah.
That's a scary place to be.
Okay, all right. I'm getting depressed during this conversation because there's obviously a lot of challenges, a lot to keep in mind, and like I said, like we're definitely, there's no shortage of parenting advice or psychiatrists or psychologists offering different takes on what's best for kids. And I have questions. I feel like we've been talking a lot just about kind of the scope of things. Like where do you want to go next? Should we kind of talk through some of the questions that we have for one another? Do you want to get to some of our proposals? We're going to end the episode with some ideas of maybe what we can do as parents just a little bit better. But what do you think?
I have two questions that I think maybe would be good to address, and I mean we can go into proposals. I mean, who cares how long the episode is, right?
Okay.
Let's just do it. Do our kids need to have the best of everything? And does having the best of everything make the best people?
Well, what do you mean by the best of everything?
I mean, there are so many levels you can start with this. Do our kids need to have the best shoes? Do our kids need to go to the best schools? Do our kids need to be on the best teams? Mm-hmm. Insert whatever you want there. Do they need to have the best phones, the best car, the best of everything to be good people?
Well,
as parents,
no. Well, you're listing different things there. So there's the materials, like the best shoes or the best. You said phones. So no, I think the obvious answer to that is no. They don't have to have the best of those. But then you mentioned the best schools as well. I'm like, well, that's a little bit more immaterial, right? Their educations and there's intrinsic value in that. So maybe let's pick. Maybe we should try to provide the best to them, but in certain areas.
Well, I'm just wondering.
I mean, if they ask for the latest iPhone, I tell them to go fly a kite. I'm not going to buy that for them.
But even just we're even as parents, oh, my kid needs to go to preschool at this school. If your kid is loved and supported and is taught, are they not going to thrive?
I get a little anxious just thinking about that. If I can provide, I don't know. I mean,
better than somebody else.
The anxiety is that they will fall behind their community of peers. All right, their community of peers is networking one another at that preschool, and kind of growing up together in a sense, and maybe if it is an elite preschool, let's just say, then they are receiving some advantages that will continue to be built upon, and whereas our child would not. I mean, that's already what's happening. You have so many different income levels and the kind of the resources that can be bought at each level. So I wonder, if you can afford, both in time and money, opportunity A, then I feel anxious not providing that to them.
Well, I just kind of wondered that in terms of what role does equity play in raising the next generation?
I'm not qualified to answer that question.
Yeah, but there's just a lot of bigger questions there. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, I don't know. Those were just questions that I had. And the other one, too, is are we modeling for our kids who they should be? As parents, when we are so worried about money or status or opportunity, what is that teaching our kids? Mm-hmm. Are we modeling your best is always good enough. You have to do what your best is. You can't compare yourself to the person next to you or to the person who has more money than you. right? Like when we're parenting a certain way, in that we're going to give them the best of everything and we're going to have more money so that we can give them more. Like what do they start chasing, and what is their expectation for like their level of performance?
Yeah.
Right? Is their best ever going to be good enough?
Well, I guess the priority is obviously character, and I don't think we've ever lost sight of that. But along with that, then comes that idea that no matter what your circumstances are, you can be happy and you can be grateful. Right. However, it would be really nice if those circumstances were, you're able to provide a comfortable living for your own children, that you can have, kind of the household and the community that you imagine is best suiting to your vision. But at a certain point, like they become their own moral agent as well. So I don't know what age that transition officially takes place, but at what point is it like, we've done our best to set them up, with their education and with their character, but now like they're officially going to go make their own decisions, and we're going to support them as best as possible, but we have to let go of some of that anxiety and expectation that we put on ourselves during their youth.
Okay. What do you think about this notion? Some people would say that kids today are more disrespectful, undisciplined, and have greater sense of entitlement. Would you agree or disagree with that statement?
I disagree, because think about every generation that has ever existed has looked at kids these days and griped about them. Like that's so saying like, oh, this is, kids used to do that, now they're disrespect. Like, no, like
Yeah, I mean, I would agree.
kids are. I mean, it depends on who they are, but you meet super respectful kids as well. But sometimes the culture changes, and so the
ways in which they are disrespectful or undisciplined or have entitlement, maybe
sometimes it's a little bit different, and it strikes someone who's older, right?
But then, whose fault is that? Is it somebody's fault? Is it the parents' fault? Right? What does my dad always say? Like when our kids are doing something and they don't say please or thank you, or they're kind of just being a pest or something. And my dad's famous line is, "Well, I blame the parents."
Yeah, but at the same time, like it's
kids are kids. But the whole point is like kids are kids, regardless of the generation or the time they're living. Kids are going to try and push their limits.
When you're old, you're going to always look at, and we'll be at that point too, where you look at kids these days. Although, like, there's some simple things that I try, and they just don't stick. Like our kids are very willing, and we've taught them to call all adults like Mr. or Mrs. and then by their last name. Well, half the adults are like, no, just call me Dave. I'm like, well, I'm trying to get them to like, have a sense of reverence for their elders, at least through title. And, culture seems uninterested in that.
I mean, I think one of the things we just all need to remember is like, we're all so wrapped up in raising our kids right that sometimes like we'll resort to like fear and punishment or shame. And really what we need to remember as parents is that we need to love them. And so I think some kids are easier or harder to love than others. And what works for one kid is not going to work for the other. So, at the end of the day, I think the question that we have to keep asking ourselves is like, how can we love our kids today?
Yeah.
Right? How can we show them love and support and encouragement? How can we teach them without always, being negative?
Yeah. But sometimes, like we were saying, that love can be a tough love too. It's like, I'm bored. Well, I think what we're saying is that the loving thing to do is not to just interrupt that boredom with becoming their playmate, or we're not saying don't play with your kids either, but like having a greater sense of what is like most natural and most long-term beneficial to our kids.
So I think that's a great way to transition into maybe like these proposals that we want to make to kind of like doing it right or doing it better.
Yeah, it's a very formal word. It's like, hear ye, hear ye.
Well,
so
it's kind of like when we do our takeaways or our challenges.
So we're going to pitch a few ideas to each other for maybe things that we could do or that we want to do just as parents, to hopefully raise our kids better.
Yeah, I mean, meeting our kids' needs is not easy and it's not without challenge, but it's something that I think we can all work on. So I think the big question, and this is the way that I phrased it, is like, what can we do to, for, and or with our kids to make sure they are
What can we do to our kids?
To, for, or with. So, like, if you're thinking about this, right, you're driving in the car, you're listening to this, right, what can I do to, for, or with them?
Okay, so my first proposal is actually to them. I think, and again, this this kind of goes along with like kids these days, but this is on us. I think that our kids need more responsibilities around the house.
Okay, so how's the two playing there?
Or well, we're going to like assign them
Oh,
certain
more
responsibilities.
responsibilities.
Yeah. And I mean, like sometimes if something needs to be done, then I would pick on someone and say like, all right, go do this. But I'm talking about like instead like regular, like consistent tasks that right now the tasks that they do are for themselves. Like you have to read, you have to practice your piano, you have to do kind of whatever they're independently working on. Um, so this is going to come across as, it's about time you kids started contributing around here. So they're little, but teaching them that sense of like, if you want this done, then you're going to need to do this yourself. And of course, then they're going to say, well, I don't want it. Like, I don't want my room vacuumed. I'm fine with the way it is. But some simple, I would say, simple and consistent chores. And then, like, just like in real life, like you don't get what you want until you've adhered to your responsibility.
Okay, so I had the same one, but that wasn't for my 2. That was my 4. So
I'm going to do that for them.
No, it was I can't do it all for them.
Oh, okay.
And so like I can be a loving parent without enabling them to be lazy and dependent on me for everything. So like give a man a fish, you'll feed him for a day, teach a man to fish, he'll eat for a lifetime. And so just as like the mom here, I'm in charge of a lot and like I just like to like have things done and done correctly. And so for me that means I err on the side of just kind of doing it all.
Oh, I mean, it's way easier just to do it on our own too.
Oh,
yeah.
So faster, more efficient, done correctly. So because I like to operate in that world, sometimes I don't give them the responsibility that I think that they should have because it would be a little more inconvenient for me. So that's kind of like my 4. Like I can't do it all for them anymore. Okay. And that's going to teach them responsibility and respect instead of demanding what they want. They have to kind of take ownership over what they need. Mm-hmm. All right.
Okay, so then part of what we'll do then is just like decide what those are going to be.
Yeah, we can take a look at those later.
All right. Well, let me throw this into this wasn't one of my original questions. Do you think an allowance is part of that picture?
Because right now they don't get one. Whole another episode.
Okay.
I feel like let's not go there. Or
right.
We have to decide on that first.
Right. Let's just keep it at no for now. It's too many of them. Okay. So that was my first proposal was having some chores.
I like that we had the same one, just worded it differently.
I know, we're always so in tune. Oh, okay.
Yeah. Let me go to my 2 then. My 2 was my kids need to be seen. And so I meant this in terms of like, am I looking at my kids or am I looking past them? Like, am I worried about their unbrushed hair or like, like you worry about your kids, but you're not like necessarily like, looking.
I mean, that's nice, but again, like it's so much pressure on yourself to be like, you should be worried about their unbrushed hair. Like that's part of like.
I know, but what I'm saying is sometimes are we too busy with like the things that, are we worrying about the things that aren't important? Like Juliet dressing herself for school and she looks like,
I get a kick out of that.
I mean, just the mismatched and the patterns and like, I'm so worried about that, right? I don't want to send her to school like that because she'd embarrass me. Mm-hmm. Or am I like looking at that she, something's wrong, something's amiss, and I'm not really looking at her. I'm worried about what she looks like and what others will say about her. So just being a little bit more in tuned. We had that today with one of the kids. They were like upset about something and it was, something silly, but it was like, all right, taking the moment to acknowledge that like something upset them and then just even like setting it straight like, hey, I know you were disappointed about this and it wasn't because we're denying your request or don't think it's important. It was just, this isn't what we're doing today. And so just making sure that we're seeing what's there instead of, just what's there on the outside.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. Do you have one?
Yeah, it comes back to screens because I think we all kind of feel this tension between like, permitting screens because, the kids are very entertained by it and it is pressure off of us so that we can, do simple things like cook dinner or have an uninterrupted conversation. And, I've done research on how much kids spend on screens per day and there's a lot of averages. And our kids are below that average. But it still bothers me. It's kind of this default in certain contexts too. So I could probably use some help shaping this, but I would like to either have like a no screens day, which would go for us as well and might be kind of nice. Or just kind of redefining the parameters so that they don't like assume that that's
A consistent
available
expectation,
at
yeah.
and it kind of puts them in the position of needing to like figure out their play.
I think that's good. A friend of mine just told her the last 3 Saturdays, her husband, like, before they go to bed, unplugs the modem. And so when they wake up in the morning, there's no internet. So that means no Netflix, no video games, no chatting with a friend on Google Hangouts or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And that they
Is
have
that true for the parents as
parents too. That they're,
guess
I
your
mean, they have their
phones still
phone.
have-
So if
yeah.
someone like needs to call you or, you know, you're reachable. But, and what their day looks like. And she even says there's this, you know, kind of like that bell curve. It's like, it's not a big deal. Then there's like a point in the afternoon where tensions rise and people want their screens and their devices and their own time. And then they kind of figure it out. And when she told me that, I was like partially like inspired and then like was like, you
Yeah.
know, it's like this, you know, it's very countercultural. It's very discomforting to even think about because it's not the norm. But does a good parent go rogue?
Yeah.
Right? When they're,
And there's certain advantages, like, and our kids wake up before 6 a.m. and they're not allowed out of their rooms until 6 a.m. And so it's still really early. And so, like, sometimes they start, like, entertaining themselves and it gets noisy and it's very early. But even if that's not the case, it's like, well, yeah, you know, I played in the basement for 2 hours and I played in my room for 2 hours and I went outside for another 4 hours. And,
and we played a family game.
yeah. And by that point, it's like, you know, I don't mean to be rude, mom and dad, but like I've been doing a lot of like play. Like, is it okay if I have a screen right now? And at that point, it's kind of like, well, yeah. I mean, the day it gets pretty lengthy. So it, you know, and a lot of times like kind of becomes this assumption that we can all turn to, and it's fun, right? So just like I said, I wanted to come with something more concrete, but like I would like to kind of like you were saying your friend has suggested, like having a day or, you know, something where we just don't treat the kind of entertainment that screens give us as a default.
Yeah. All right. So my last one is the with, and it actually says play with them.
Oh, gee.
But
Okay.
in this context,
But
like
we are.
culturally, we've received the message that we have to play with our kids all the time, right? That like I have to stop what I'm doing all day, every day. Like, oh, I'm in the middle of cooking dinner. I'm going to stop now and do a puzzle with my 2-year-old. Or like I'm working from home, but you know someone wants to to paint with me, and I have to stop. And I think that we have to kind of like let that go because that's not healthy and it's not practical. Like we still have houses to run, we still have careers and jobs and other obligations. So we can't play with them all day, all of the time. So we have to like take the pressure off of trying to be our kids' entertainment for 99% of the day. But we do have to give in and play with them and interact with them and engage with them at some point. And so that should be kind of freeing in that, like, whether it's a designated time or like a designated activity that the family's all together, that's part of the plan. And so, taking that time each day to like,
I
to
know,
be with the
but
kids.
but I feel like we're doing that already.
Right. But it's just a friendly reminder that it doesn't have to be all day, every day. Like, it's okay for Roman to like play with his toys in his room. And just because it's me and him home means I have to sit with him and watch him. So it's just play with them under the parameters that's not the only thing that you have to do. So you take some of the pressure off. That's all.
Okay, so play with them less?
It doesn't matter how much you play with them, but we should just always remember to play with them. Like this morning, we went sledding with the kids for an hour. And that's great. That doesn't mean now that we need to play dinosaurs for the next 9 hours.
Okay.
So, all right. So do you have anything else that you want to add to the list of proposals?
No, I guess my last takeaway is just the simple observation that parenting is important, and we should continue to think into dialogue about it. But we could take the pressure off of ourselves in the sense that there's no script. There's a lot of advice out there, and a lot of different ways of doing things, all like with love behind it and with these intents behind it. So I think we have to be intentional about our parenting, but be aware of some of the sources of maybe the anxieties and the fears and the types of motivations that are driving our behaviors, and being able to despite those things, still make the best decisions for our kids that we can.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it has to do with modeling. What do they see us doing as a part of our plan, as a part of our habits? When they see those things, they become like normalize them. And so, having hobbies, having interests, not always being on screens, doing our best. I think those are all good things. And if our kids see us doing those things, then it's easier for them to follow suit. Mm-hmm. And so parenting is hard, and it's easy for an outsider to say you're doing it right or you're doing it wrong, or give you advice when they don't know really like the dispositions of your children's or the dynamic in your family. And so let people give you advice, take it in, and with a grain of salt, and figure out what part of that is real and works for you. And then when you don't know, even just being honest about not knowing, and kind of be in search of, what that next thing is for you to make it make more sense, and to do your best.
Yeah. Is this the first episode we've dedicated entirely to kids?
I think so.
Okay. I know they come up in most of the conversations.
They do.
All right. So probably not the last that we'll spend time talking specifically about parenting or about children. But we do hope that you've enjoyed this conversation, and certainly as we'll continue to just explore and to share thoughts, we look forward to just learning from you parents who are out there as well about what's working for you.
Yeah, so feel free to share what works for you, what you're trying, what hasn't worked, because we'd love to hear about it.
Absolutely. All right, thanks for listening so much today.
See you next week.
Bye-bye. Thanks so much for listening to today's show. We hope you will use this conversation as a starting point for your own. We hope you're encouraged to think and act more intentionally.
If you want to learn more, you can visit our website, therelentlesspursuitpodcast.com, where you can find notes on today's show, plus additional blog posts, and you can subscribe to our free members list.
Please subscribe, leave a review, and share with your friends.
Facebook and Instagram are two great places to connect with us for daily doses of our quotable quotes, behind the scenes, and real-time photos, videos, and challenges.
Until next time, let us know how you are taking life off autopilot
and relentlessly pursuing what matters.